Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. So this is another book review. This is a review on The Rules of Magic, and I will try and keep it as simple and as spoiler-free as I can. So I will read the synopsis and then go from there. So, Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. For the Owens family, love is a curse that began in 1620, when Maria Owens was charged with witchery for loving the wrong man. Hundreds of years later, in New York City at the cusp of the 60s, when the whole world is about to change, Susanna Owens knows that her three children are dangerously unique. Difficult Franny, with skin as pale as milk and blood-red hair, shy and beautiful Jet, who can read other people's thoughts, and charismatic Vincent, who began looking for trouble on the day he could walk. From the start, Susanna sets down rules for her children. No walking in the moonlight, no red shoes, no wearing black, no cats, no crows, no candles, no books of magic, or about magic. And most importantly, never ever fall in love. But when her children visit her, their Aunt Isabel, in the small Massachusetts town where the Owens family has been blamed for everything that has ever gone wrong, they uncover family secrets and begin to understand the truth of who they are. Back in New York City, each begins a risky journey as they try to escape the family curse. The Owens children cannot escape love even if they try, just as they cannot escape the pains of the human heart. The two beautiful sisters will grow up to be the revered and sometimes feared aunts in the book Practical Magic, while Vincent, their beloved brother, an un, will leave an unexpected legacy. So, um, as it was said, as it mentioned, these two aunts, Fran and Susanna, they are, or rather, sorry, Frowny and Jet, they are the two aunts that are represented in the movie and in the book Practical Magic, who raise um, Sally and Jillian. Had a blank moment there. Um, so this book I'm going to give absolutely 5 out of 5 stars. Unlike the other book, Practical Magic, where I'd basically give it a 3, maybe a 4 if I was feeling generous. This one was everything that I had hoped that the Practical Magic would be. So again, to sort of recap, I thought Practical Magic would have more history information thrown in, as the movie had dictated and mentioned a lot more about their history and their past, specifically about Maria, and the book had barely mentioned it at all, which left me extremely disappointed because, as I have mentioned in the past, that when it comes to magic and witches and those kinds of stories, what draws me in the most is the history and the where and the why and the how that goes behind the story itself. And the Rules of Magic fulfilled that for me in like every sense, every way that I could have thought of or asked for. It starts off talking about the three girls and the family and how they have all these rules. And, as they're growing up, they're learning and discovering themselves and things that they can do, but they have to try and hide it from their mom because their mom is extremely against them learning anything. And mostly it's because their mom just doesn't want them to go down the same path that she knows that they could go down, and tries to protect them from their family history. So, Maria Owens, who started this whole thing, had fallen in love with a boy, and it turned out that this boy was married to someone else. And when she winds up pregnant, typical story, she winds up pregnant, and he finds out, and she thought that he would stand by her, and in the end, he cast her aside because she was basically, back then in the world of classes, she was a much lower class, and he was all high and mighty and couldn't be bothered to stand up against anything else. And he ended up not supporting her or the child that she carried. He handed her as much money as he thought he could spare for her, and basically left the decision to her whether she decided to abort it, keep it. It didn't matter to him. He didn't care. He wanted nothing more to do with her or the life that she now carried. So that act of betrayal ended up dooming both families. And that's something that doesn't really get mentioned at all. So, going into rules of magic, everything gets opened up, everything gets dissected. Um, there is so many turns and plots, and there are so many different things that get explained. There are so many avenues in the story, and they touch upon everything from the past to the present to the future. And then eventually we'll have a small lead in into Practical Magic, which is the next book. So again, Maria Owens, like I said, that whole situation ends up damning two different families who are interconnected. The father's entire line has the same rules apply to them as it does to her. So for them, it's women who fall in love end up dooming the man that they fall in love with. And on their side, you'll learn that the men have the same problem. And so they have no good history. They both live in the same little town in Massachusetts, and the families are constantly at war because of this history that started it out in the beginning. As you know, life goes on, each kid ends up going down their own path. So um, you've got Franny, who is difficult, and Jet, who has the idea or the ability to read people's minds, and then Vincent's a very interesting story. In the movie Practical Magic, or even in the book, he's not mentioned whatsoever, and then you learn in Rules of Magic there's a reason for that. He ends up falling in love as well, and well, they all end up falling in love, and it takes them all down very different paths. Vincent ends up taking him down a path towards the world, towards the Vietnam War, where he gets drafted, which ends up leading the family scattering and jumbling and trying to figure out how to prevent that from happening, and how to prevent him from going to war, because one of the biggest rules that goes into the life of witchery for them, number one rule is no harm to any. And him being drafted to war puts into conflict that one rule, or bring harm to none kind of thing. So, knowing that breaking that one rule would ultimately lead to his demise and the family's ruin, they band together to figure out how to get around him being drafted and how to get away from that. So eventually he becomes a deserter. And so they end up dealing with that. And if anyone knows the history back then, being a deserter, you might as well have been shot and killed, because you either were imprisoned or you were shot and killed for deserting. And it didn't really matter what country you were drafted from. In this case, he was drafted in the US, and you were imprisoned for being a deserter. And then the girls, they each fall in love with someone that, they meet very young. And the difficulties go back and forth because they don't really want to be in love with that person, but they find they have no choice. So they both end up going down different paths, trying to figure out how to get around this curse, because there's nothing good will come from it. Everyone goes through lots of loss, and there is just it's hard to get too much into detail without spoiling anything. There is so much story, so much history, and as I said, nothing gets left unturned. They go from literally the beginning of these children's lives, and then they go into, the teenage years and a little bit older, and then eventually adulthood. And then again, like I said, as they get into their much older time frame, it leads into Practical Magic, and it's a really good story. It's, like I said, it's 5 out of 5 stars. I couldn't have asked for a better story, which tells me that they pulled some of the history from this book and threw it into the movie Practical Magic. So they blended the two stories a little bit, and that's how you got your movie, while as most of the situations or events that happened did come from Practical Magic itself. So while Practical Magic, the book, really let me down, Rules of Magic did not. And I would highly recommend this one to anyone who likes a good history story with magic and family. So, this was the first book that I have read for the month of October, as I have a very long list to get through. So, this is book 1. So, thank you again so much for listening. For those of you who are new, I appreciate you checking out my channel, and I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. For those of you who are current subscribers and followers, I greatly appreciate your support, and I will see you all in the next video.